The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the Hot Grill Summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
If you'd sent it at the same time yesterday,
Yes.
that would have been like
Annabelle,
exceptional.
would you send the Prime Minister your question line a day beforehand? Toby's a professional. You can't ask him for special favours like this. I think he's going to go easy on you just because you're friends.
Sick burn.
Tēnā koutou katoa. This is Toby Manhire with Gone by Lunchtime. It's a regular politics podcast on the spinoff.co.nz with Annabelle Lee Mather. Hi, Annabelle.
Kia ora and free Palestine.
And good day to you, Ben Thomas.
Morena? No, it's the afternoon.
It's the afternoon.
I'm very tired.
It's 1:02 on the 22nd of June, 2021. This table is a little creaky. We'll have to do something about that.
Let's incorporate it into a bit so that when we talk about Winston Peters, we just make it sound like a crypt door opening.
Very
kind
good.
of creaky.
Very good. Very good.
Can you make a note there, Tina? Just
Thank you,
fix that in post.
Tina, for putting up with us again.
She honestly loves it, though, eh?
You
This is
kind of
honestly
think
the
she
highlight of her week.
Does. Yeah. Do you
Look
want
at
to...
her. She loves it.
Don't need to say anything, Tina. Just keep your silence. The Winston Peters you mentioned, a lot of people wait around. A lot of people got very excited about the new Lord. But on the Gone by Lunchtime podcast, we've been hanging out for the new Winston Peters to drop. And it did drop on Sunday at the New Zealand First AGM or convention or whatever it was. And instead of solar power, it's the original steam engine. Winston Peters rocking in. And it was like, don't know if you guys caught much of it. It was like he was rummaging around in a drawer. What have I got here? What do we got? And it just sort of pulled out some old scraps and some mementos and curios. Maybe there's a cufflink from from
John Key.
1967. He'd been off the scene, almost completely invisible since the election in October of last year. He'd been almost it was almost like a record label was managing this kind of almost performed absence.
The difficult third album.
The difficult 35th album, yeah. And then he came along, and there was no sort of overarching vision. There was no grand future of New Zealand tum to tum. It was his main bit.
Did it feel like he was happy to see us?
Did it feel like a little bit?
There
was a lot of there was a lot of my friends in the media and having a go. That's what keeps him going, isn't it? That's what keeps that steam engine ticking. Aotearoa was his main thing. It was kind of like, that's what he went for his main argument in the speech was all these people, we called it the name change cult, are trying to change the name of our country without checking with us. It's like John Key wanted to change the flag without checking with us, and they're going to call... What did you think?
I thought that he sounded a bit more like a flat tyre than a handbrake.
Mm-hmm.
The air slowly whistling its way out.
Well, if you do too many handbrake turns, that's going to happen, isn't it? Your tyres are going to eventually...
Bald tyres. I think certainly within Māoridom, his speech came as an unpleasant surprise to rail against the use of te reo Māori, he puapua, strange kind of issues that are really kind of focused on identity politics and nothing really much about the economy or any of that stuff. And it just felt weird because, you know, there's two other parties who actually did manage to get elected back into Parliament who are able to cover the kind of race identity issue stuff in a much slicker fashion than New Zealand First now, particularly David Seymour. So for him to try and mine that vein surprised me instead of focusing on his sweet spot, which is more about, you know, catering to the oldies, you know, healthcare for the kids, the more kind of economic focus, railing about John Key, who hasn't been in Parliament for ages, he puapua, all of that stuff. It just felt like a koro who was out of ideas.
There's a lot of competition for the right-wing populist separatism rhetoric space, Ben Thomas. Did it surprise you that he decided to make his claim to that relatively shrinking, I would have thought, vote?
I feel like that would be kind of like, you know, being surprised that, what is it, the scorpion stung the frog or whatever. I mean, Winston Peters' common refrain throughout the grab bag of issues that he has addressed over the years is that things have changed too much and he would like them to go back. Probably to sometime around when he started politics in the 70s, maybe a bit earlier to when he was a kid in the 50s.
He did invoke the 50s and 60s in the speech.
Yeah, and that's really what he's appealing to. You know, he's not saying, you know, it's not so much, you know, I don't like Aotearoa. It's like, that's not the name of the country that I grew up with. And so he's appealing to this idea that things are changing too fast and have been for the last 40 years, maybe for the last 70 years since the war. And so I don't think there's any sort of surprise in that. You know, New Zealand First is functionally a nostalgia party, often for an imagined past now. You know, you're getting to where even the oldest voters, you know, could barely remember the times that Peters is harking back to. It's this Chris Trotter sort of, you know, utopian idol of 1970s New Zealand as the happiest place on earth with the men in the kitchen, the women in the kitchen, the men in the lounge, the Māoris out the back playing 10 guitars, and everyone was happy and got along. There was universal welfare. No one was on the DPB because you couldn't get divorced and the pill wasn't available. And
it's like the Happy Days version of history, isn't it? You know, because Happy Days was a sitcom about the 50s that was made in the 70s and 80s, so it already had that romantic tinge, and it feels like it's at that many removes in terms of the idea of the New Zealand idyll. It's
so much even further than that. You know, I saw somebody saying that the election of Jacinda Ardern kind of put to bed the 1980s. The spectre of the 1980s and the Rogernomics reforms and the opening up of the economy and the removal of that sort of planned economy that has been around that has sort of hung over New Zealand politics like a shadow, and all Labour leaders probably prior to Jacinda Ardern have grappled with that legacy, you know, even though it's 30 years ago to some extent. And Peters is the only person who's actually saying, we don't want any of that. We just want to go back, bring back. Although what was interesting was he was actually talking about opening up the economy. and bringing people back. And he acknowledged in his speech and said, a lot of people probably don't want anyone to come back in, and then sort of grudgingly sort of acknowledged it was necessary for tourism and business. So it really is playing to that sort of small New Zealand, kind of like little Britain, provincialism that actually we've seen a bit of an uptick in since COVID.
I thought one issue that he raised, which is kind of an interesting debate that's going on in Te Ao Māori in a much more nuanced way than he presented it, is the use of Māori names for Māori government departments, and he railed against he waka kotahi and that sort of thing, but there is actually a kind of a deeper discussion at play, and it's more about using these names without actually sharing power with the party to whom they belong, that they become a bit of a facade as being a bicultural entity when actually there's still a lot of work that needs to be done internally. But, if Winston wants his legacy as a descendant of Ngāti Wai to be, trying to cancel Te Reo Māori at a time when so many people around Aotearoa see the incredible value of our language, and that's a pretty lame legacy to leave.
In terms of whether he can get back, like you say, ACT and National have got that space. I think Seymour is a much bigger threat to him than the National Party is right now.
Absolutely. And the thing about David Seymour is that he can kind of deliver similar messages, but in a way where you don't feel like you're just getting razzed up by your old angry uncle. Like, he can actually do it with an element of like youthful charm and intellect, whereas with Winston it just feels like you're getting growled up by koro.
Well, did you see Seymour's tweet where he quote tweeted that Peters quote about, who decided the name of our country was Aotearoa? And he said, well, Winston was in Parliament when the Māori Language Act was passed and he voted for it, so he did.
Kupe, actually. I think we all understand it was kupe.
And interestingly enough, there was a thing, I think it was last year or maybe the year before. It was back before MAGA hats had become completely verboten. And Seymour held a fundraising event, or just a speaking sort of thing, and he called it the Make Aotearoa Great Again meeting. And I think it was the most hated thing in New Zealand politics, because it was the people who hated Donald Trump thought that he was appealing to the alt-right. But then all of the conservatives were like, I don't even know where Aotearoa is.
I think it's to steal a joke that Philip Matthews made. But one of the advantages, if they did embrace Aotearoa, was that then their name would then be AF. So they could, for example, have as slogans "Patriotic AF" or "Principled AF." Which I think would bring in some new voters. I mean, the question, can he come back? One of the questions which he, in interviews the following day, wasn't totally committed on is whether or not he, at the age of 78, which will be in 2023, can lead the party into the next election. Because, look, I mean, even the most sprightly, puckish survivor of New Zealand politics, 78, that's... Can you do it?
It is, but it's also a state of mind, because if you look at Bernie Sanders, for example, he's way more onto it and progressive and youthful than what Winston is. So, I mean, I get that. I get the age thing, but actually it's not even about age with Winston. It's about attitude, and I think people just are a bit hoha with those sort of dinosaur whakaaro around things like Te Reo Māori.
And if look, there's definitely a constituency for that sort of thing, but whether he
but
can
not 5% worth, apparently.
Yeah, well, not 5% worth when you're fighting over it with ACT,
and when you're coming out of being part of government when you've been Deputy Prime Minister.
Yeah, and that's why, I mean, he'll be, if he decides to campaign again, he'll be in a much more comfortable place for him this time, which will be just oppositional and critical.
It was interesting when he talked about Jacinda Ardern in the speech. He specifically said, I don't want to attack Jacinda Ardern. You know, it's a bit like you mentioned with the opening up. He's seen the numbers, the poll numbers. He was there with her. It's a tricky position. And so it's a bit handbrake, it's a bit this, it's a bit the other. What I kind of thought in terms of was just the way the speech was put together. What was the narrative of the speech overall? Nothing really. Yeah. And, you know, going for that old, you know, of the Māori language is coming in seemed a bit flat to me.
Now, you obviously had a bit of help with it because it used the word meta-narrative.
Did it?
Yeah. so that's also a new one for Winston.
Also, someone had used the Control-F function to find how many times the word Aotearoa appeared in the Climate Change Commission report, which might not be within Winston's skill set. I'm not sure. That
tweets about Aotearoa, Maori name for New Zealand.
I thought it was interesting that Ron Marks wasn't there.
It was the Ron Mark. Very, very good episode in your new series from Ron Mark. We'll just plug that again, shall we?
Thank you.
I wondered though, and we're going to talk about the whole electric car rebate scheme and the ute debate and all that sort of stuff, which he mentioned along the way, but just in passing in this kind of laundry list of things, is if he'd given a speech about how Heartland New Zealand has been abandoned, you know, that sort of stuff, and he wraps into it about we have a leadership now which has failed to understand the reality of ordinary life in New Zealand is what New Zealand. Then you rock on with your nostalgia,
or like
jukebox
some big policy things like we're going to bring back delivering milk to your door on a petrol truck ute thing. And we're going to pay kids real low wages and you can have full cream milk in your letterbox for the token. Like that, I could get on board with that.
Milk tokens. It would be good.
Let's get a bit of that.
Super gold card with milk tokens.
Yeah.
Peters needs to actually put his money where his mouth is in terms of sort of returning to New Zealand's glory days. He should say, look, climate change, ETS, we know how to fix this, carless days.
Carless days, yeah, that's right. And one channel. We'll go back to one channel.
Everyone gets their Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday sticker and they can't drive that day. It was good enough for Muldoon, it's good enough for us.
Let's talk about utes. One of the scheme which was announced weekend before last by Michael Wood, who is now the minister of releasing the handbrake, I think, and half of the things across his portfolio he's pushing through. Positions that were untenable with the handbrake of New Zealand First at the cabinet table. The scheme means rebates up to $8,625 when you get a new EV, full electric vehicle. Plug-in hybrids get a bit. If you get imports, you get a bit less than that. Annabelle, you're going to buy an electric car?
Yeah, but once my tikanga is that I just drive my car until it's absolutely munted and it can't go anymore, which I think is the preference before changing over to an electric vehicle.
That's the best environmental solution.
Yeah, to just drive your car until it's munted. Right. But yes, definitely I'd love to have an electric vehicle and a big fat rebate. Yes, please.
And
but not a yellow one like Mihi's one.
What's is the shade of yellow, or is it?
He's got a very bright yellow car that you can see on our stories of Tainui doco. It's quite confronting.
It's quite good for safety reasons having a bright
very good
yellow
for
vehicle,
safety
because they don't make a lot of noise, right? And so
that's right.
So you really want to catch the visual field of
Indeed.
Ben, the other part of it is that they it's going to be cost neutral is the plan, because as of January 1 next year, the high emitting vehicles will be will have an extra tax, not a tax, an extra fee lumped on top of them, and that has then taken us down the road of your old kind of cultural warrior type stuff, and whether or not the ute is the wedge issue, whether or not the ute is the light bulb of 2023, and Ardern described at one point that she talked about people who have legitimate uses for utes, which was, of course, absolutely jumped upon by both National and ACT because, of course, it suggests that people with utes illegitimate use. And so I imagine on your Ford Ranger, your double cab Ford Ranger, as you rip through the streets of Westmere, you're going to write proudly deplorable, proudly illegitimate on the side, correct?
I have a lot of sympathy for the government's position in this. I used to live in beautiful St Mary's Bay in Auckland, which has these very narrow sort of, former horse track streets. There's no off-street parking.
Were you
in a lot of the
neighbours with
streets.
Winston?
No, he's closer to the water in Jan's house. The people have got a pool. And it's fucking hard to get through the streets when there's not enough room for like two Holden Colorados on each side, And if you go to the supermarket and you just scan, in the sort of leafy suburbs where I go, it's crazy how big people's cars are.
Yeah.
People don't need. So on a personal level, I have a lot of sympathy for the Prime Minister's position or Julianne Genter's position that people who have giant utes but aren't farmers or tradies generally just have like small dicks. But at the same time, it becomes very difficult to sort of clearly delineate between these things.
Well, you could ask.
You could ask. Yeah, that's all right.
Good idea.
Airports, those airports screening things. We'll just put them in each car dealership.
Double cab ute owners through Part C, please.
And even a lot of tradies don't actually need them. You go past building sites and there's all these 20-year-olds who don't even have their own tools and stuff.
I've never seen, you see these things you can't see. You're trying to drop your kid off to something and you can't see to the left because there's some massive fucking monstrous ute in front of you and it has never seen a speck of dirt in its life, that thing.
Oh, absolutely. And, people say, all these cheap second-hand cars that we bring in, like Suzuki Swifts, have like low safety ratings. Well, of course they do. Most suburban housewife cars will run them over like a fucking Kentucky monster truck. Like, you don't need to be fitted out for a Mad Max fucking busting out through the dystopian like oil village just to drop your kids off at ballet, for fuck's sake. So again, we return. I'm very sympathetic to Jacinda. Actually, I'm not sympathetic to Jacinda Ardern because Clark doesn't need a ute either.
Has Clark got a ute?
Yeah.
Does he own a ute or does he just use a ute?
Well, he's at least given the use of a ute.
Yes.
Probably for his boat or something, for fishing, whatever. But I mean, is that legitimate?
Is it legitimate? Well, you've got to put a lot of, to bring together the metaphor you had before, you've got to have somewhere to put your tackle.
I am not a supporter of a socialist revolution, any kind of armed uprising. But if there was one, the first thing that I would want done is all of these suburban wank wagons being taken off their owners and distributed to my friends down on the East Coast, Hawke's Bay, Turtuera, Bay of Plenty, who actually need them largely to be able to pull me out when I get stuck in a ditch.
And your Suzuki Swift.
A very legitimate use. So I don't know if we got very far on the politics.
I think we solved that.
No, that was good.
We're going to collectivise the utes and we're going to relocate them. We'll be right back to discuss vaccines.
Host the ultimate backyard barbecue with Whole Foods Market. It's the hot grill summer event through July 16th with sizzling sales on no antibiotics ever boneless beef ribeye steak and beef New York strip steak. Plus, check out sales on sustainable wild-caught Alaska sockeye salmon, organic strawberries, and more. In a hurry? Choose grab-and-go favorites like picnic salads and sushi, plus plenty of cooler-friendly beverages. Make it a hot grill summer at Whole Foods Market.
I'm Toby Manhire and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the 4th Labour government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts. Vaccines. The rollout of the vaccines, the Pfizers, to the hoi polloi, the general public, was announced last Friday. People aged 60 and over from July 28, people aged 55 and over from August 11, and then the youngsters, that's us, all people aged over 16 from October. Ben and Annabelle. The Prime Minister celebrated that announcement by getting her first dose, which she said wasn't very painful. And that was intended to, I suppose, calm some of the concerns about the rollout, whether it was happening fast enough, whether the doses were arriving in time. Do you think that that has been effective? Is the reality is that we are still the slowest in the OECD, yet we are running ahead of schedule. One of the things that, National Party and Chris Bishop particularly are trying to bang away at this without being left to be stood accused of being a hater and a wrecker of the government's
Hater potatoes.
The government's wonderful response to COVID. It's a tricky one, isn't it? You don't feel as though there is still much public alarm. I think that a lot of that has got to do with the fact that we haven't had an outbreak for a long time.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Annabelle, is it a hot political issue or is it just fine?
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem to be a hot political in terms of the amount of discussion that I hear about it. And I guess, as you say, that's because we don't have community outbreak. It does seem like it's slow. I know my mum, she's nearly 70. She still hasn't had her shot. And then I know other people that have. And then on top of that, apparently there's some issue where the DHBs, they want them to be on track, but they don't want them to be ahead because I don't know, something to do with. I don't know.
They don't want to have to slow it down, I think, is the issue at the time.
And is it something to do with the number of vaccines that are actually here as well?
Yep.
That if you get too far ahead, I don't know.
There's a million coming in July.
We need good oppositioning on it, though, to just keep everyone on their toes.
There hasn't been particularly transparent information from the government. There was the panic about a week or so back when my old colleague Matthew Hooton wrote a column saying that it probably shouldn't have stated as fact that we were going to run out of the vaccine in 3 days. But at the root of it was that the government was giving different figures in different places, which, at this stage doesn't really seem to be good enough. We've seen that a lot of frontline border workers still haven't been vaccinated. There doesn't seem to be any urgency, and part of that is down to the fact that the public's not demanding it. I feel like we're actually almost at a bit of a crossroads for New Zealand in that people, I think it's pretty inarguable, we've become pretty insular as a country since the pandemic. Part of that is a function of there being a global pandemic, of course. But it'll be interesting to see whether people start getting a little more worked up about rejoining the world once the US is vaccinated, once the UK is vaccinated, if Australia ever gets vaccinated, and instead of the comparisons of everyone else is in lockdown and we're having 60,000 people at 660. It's like, well, we can't see 660 because they're playing overseas. Lord's touring the US, which is reopened. Tina's back recording Gone by Lunchtime because Jonathan disappeared somewhere. And I think at that point, will people say, well, we don't need the rest of the world anyway. We're happy to become this hermetically sealed lost city of Atlantis in the South Pacific. Or will people start going, what the hell? Where are our vaccines?
And I certainly think the pressure is growing on that, but it's still small. It's still the overall sentiment is pretty clear. And there are not people. I mean, I was at an Australia tourism event last night, and they are having to work hard to try and convince people to go to Australia. And you sort of understand that when you see that how often there have been pauses in different parts of the
Don't go to Australia, everyone. We're not talking to them. We're not talking to them. No.
Oh, what are we? Oh.
No, we're not. We're not.
Can Ben go to see his mum?
Stay here. Go to Rotorua.
Can Ben go to Australia to see his mum?
We'll consider it.
It's a long process, but
if there's some kind of pause or travel disruption, it won't be the first time that I've lived parasitically in my parents' house as an adult. So.
writing comments on the internet.
Yeah, that's so set myself up in the backyard with some VBs and a Vodafone Australia SIM card, and just.
I think because the government did such a good job of the COVID response, that there's high levels of trust, and while I think everybody would like to have their vaccinations sooner rather than later, I think there's high trust that it's going to happen, and there's not that sense of urgency because we don't have it. Interestingly, I think in Te Ao Māori there's probably more concern at the moment around mental health services, and a lot of support for the stance Mike King has taken.
Yeah, well, and there's also been a series of stories this week in the Herald yesterday and News Hub as well about the number of beds, mental health beds, and clearly the dragging of the chain. Things haven't happened in the mental health area. We should probably get into that at greater length.
It's that delivery issue again. There was the $1.9 billion headline figure in that first much vaunted wellbeing budget, and none of it's got out the door.
Well, I think that's part of Mike's frustration, is that he's actually got the infrastructure in place to be able to start delivering immediately. They've got all the counsellors signed up, on board, ready to do it. They know the whānau that need the help and all of that, and it's just not enough money, not enough support, not enough urgency around it.
It's a good example of where, the government's much lampooned sort of addiction to working groups kind of came a bit unstuck, in the sense that the minister clearly didn't have a very good idea himself of what he wanted to happen in that space, hadn't really done the work in opposition, and at the point at which there was this huge amount of money, suddenly fell to the Ministry of Health, who, touch wood, will maintain their undeserved reputation for competence that they earned during COVID, but is actually a bit of a basket case ministry, and and none of that big headline figure has actually there's been a few pilot programs. There's been a lot of work done on very moderate cases. Now you can go to a lot of GPs and, get a couple of sessions of counselling, learn some coping strategies, that sort of thing. But in terms of, the really, high needs or even kind of medium needs, not a lot's happening.
And also, getting to our rangatahi, because, if you get in while they're young and stuff, makes a big difference in their 30s. But the headline that's literally just come through on my phone is just 5 new beds and 1.9 billion mental health mess.
Yep, and I think I think it's enough of a kind of epidemic of its own that most people know someone or know someone who has at the sharp end in some way, and it's there is absolutely no manifestation of change in terms of that rollout. Let's talk about Wellington, because Ben Thomas is always eager to talk about Wellington as Wellington has paddles and it has Ben. And Wellington this Thursday, the council is voting on the spatial plan, which is a little bit like Auckland had its unitary plan, and it addresses sort of housing density in a city that faces a very real housing crisis, homelessness challenges, and there is now the urban development plan, is that what it's called, that Phil Twyford put through, which requires councils to free up
national policy statement. Yeah,
it's gone back and forth the spatial plan, but basically it seems like the council planning staff have, in response to objections on the part of owners of heritage villas and so forth, or as some will call them, NIMBYs, they've sort of wheeled it back a bit and created a lot. And anyway, so the vote on Thursday will be a test, some are saying, about whether or not the council is really committed to changing the reality of intensified housing in the city. Ben?
Very good piece about this on the spinoff.co.nz today.
The Neil Jones piece.
By my comrade, associate Neil Jones. He points out, I think the key, he makes a very good and strong case for why the council needs to take more action, mark more areas as open for development, the massive infrastructure problems and more importantly, the huge housing deficit that Wellington faces. It's become completely unaffordable. When I moved down to Wellington about 2008, you got extremely good deals compared to Auckland. Now I think rentals are higher in Wellington than they are in Auckland because there just isn't enough stock. There aren't enough houses being built. And that's because of, all of these sort of entitled, weird yes minister kind of caricature bureaucrats and Victoria University academics who don't want anything to ever change from their, fucking print of the Auckland Oriental Bay Hills that they have hanging in their Airbnb.
Well, that's a caricature in itself, though, isn't it? I mean,
yes.
the other reality is, yes, of course, there are mouldy old villas and there are some that are in disrepair, but there's also a lot of beautiful architecture in Wellington that defines the character of the place, and so is it not reasonable to try and find a middle ground where you protect certain kind of belts or pockets of heritage housing while clearing other areas so that you can do more intensified work?
I tend to be a bit of a property rights person about it. If you want to keep your beautiful heritage home, you can. And then if you want to sell it to somebody who will keep it as a beautiful heritage home, you can do that as well.
I just think that there's an interesting kind of relationship between this kaupapa and the next one we're about to talk about, which is Putiki Bay, and how, a section of New Zealand society rails against the idea of development, when it threatens colonial relics like rotting houses in Wellington, for the purpose of being able to create housing for more New Zealanders. And then you have an issue like Putiki Bay on Waiheke Island, which is a pristine, beautiful bay where waka literally for the last 1,000 years, boats of all shapes and sizes have been able to land safely, and it's the home to korora, little blue penguins, the landing place of the Tainui waka where it was relashed at Rangihaua, and the bay is named Putiki after Te Putiki o Kahumata Momoi. That's not considered something worth protecting because they're about to build a massive marina there that the community doesn't want. And it kind of harks back to the whole Iwi Kiwi campaign that Don Brash ran, whipping up fear that, Māori were going to fence off the beaches and charge New Zealanders to go for their, summer dip. But actually the reality of how iwi Kiwi works in New Zealand is that rich people get to usurp amazing spaces like an entire bay. It's going to be about 10 acres of development on the sea at the expense of ordinary New Zealanders, Māori and Pākehā and Tauiwi alike, to build marinas for rich pricks that don't want to get their shoes wet when they arrive on Waiheke. It's disgraceful.
And is that kind of your tūranga waiwai as well, that part of Waiheke?
I'm not mana whenua, I'm not Ngāti Pāwa, it's Ngāti Pāwa whenua, but it's where I grew up.
There,
it's where I spent my entire childhood. It's where it's definitely where my heart is, and it's so sad to see such a special place being vandalised when people have been able to use it and enjoy it literally for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. But, the Minister of... And it just goes to show that when it comes to these issues, it's just a battle of attrition. Whoever's got the most money will win.
Court process, isn't it?
Yeah.
It was approved. The council, I think, 5 years ago or so gave approval, and then... It's been through the courts, Environment Court, Court. It's at the Supreme Court now or something, I think even.
I think the last
Supreme
one...
Court gave it the okay.
Yeah. But the Minister of Conservation has it within their powers to be able to overturn a decision like that. It's happened once before with Chris Carter with the proposed marina at Whangamata. It ended up being overturned by the Court of Appeal, I believe, because there'd been some procedural... flaw, but it's definitely within the purview of the Minister of Conservation to be able to overrule.
And Chloe Swarbrick is one of those who's opposing the marina development, isn't she?
She is.
Local MP.
Local MP for Waiheke.
Get it, Chloe money.
So you're squarely with the penguins on this.
Bro, I'm with the korora all day.
Mm-hmm. Ben, do you have any strong thoughts about the penguins?
I think the most important thing to note on this and the previous issue, which is the spatial plan, the point that Neil made was that councils are actually structurally not set up to do anything except support the interests of wealthy, older landowners. Younger people, more transient people who don't own their own homes are less likely to vote. They're less likely to be invested in it. Local government is structurally set up to benefit people on Waiheke Island who have their own boats, from which will roll off a fucking SUV like the tanks at Normandy up the road to the Batch. And, this is why we need to abolish local government, obviously. And... but I'm quite serious about that. There is there's the review that Nanaia Mahuta has commissioned into what the role of local government should be. And they have to seriously start thinking about actually just dismantling the whole thing.
That solar power video was shot on Waiheke, wasn't it? Was that a sort of subversive Kennedy Point protest?
I hope so,
protesting?
Lord. Go down to Kennedy Point, Lord.
You'll
probably get arrested. Be careful, girl. Take some legal support.
In conclusion, collectivise the utes, shut down the councils, and save the penguins. One more thing, very quickly. On this Saturday at 5 p.m. at the Auckland Town Hall, kind of interesting historic moment, there will be a formal apology, Annabelle Lee Mather, issued for the dawn raids. Why is that such a big deal?
Well, it's a big deal because it, devastated a lot of Pasifika whānau who came over here answering the call of New Zealand when we needed their labour, and then we turned around and booted them out when we didn't want them anymore. So ka nui te mihi kia koutou ngā uri o te moana nui a kiwa. Mō tō koutou kaha u ki tēnei kaupapa. Congratulations to all of the whānau who were affected by this for finally getting the apology they so richly deserve.
Kia ora. This is Gone by Lunchtime. Catch you next time.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.